Order. Thanks to the second speaker from the proposition, I'd like to call on the second speaker from the opposition.
A very good afternoon to the House at large. Now, first of all, as side opposition, I'm going to engage with what side proposition has brought up for us in this debate by way of rebuttal under the following subheadings. The first being economic effects, the second being influence, and the third being the issue of conditional investment. After which I will further move on to my substantive matter, which deals with an incentive for African development. Now, first of all, let's look at this first very presumptuous assumption that was made by side proposition. They claim that we are only talking about loans, but have not failed to logically realize that loans was simply an example used by my colleague here to analyze what exactly is going on and to actually drive home the point. Now let's look further at economic effects. Now the real issue that's coming out here is that China are just coming in and looking for their own interests. Now we are saying that's okay. China is not a charity case. China also needs to look out for itself. But what we need to realize is that China is out for this very interesting English term, mutual benefit. That means it's not wrong for China to benefit from this investment, but by the same token, we want Africa benefiting, thank you, which is what is happening right now. So technically that point is really unrealistic. And the second issue of China owning 40% of their resources, we are saying if China can own 40% of those resources and can develop them and help Africans to benefit from those resources, then by all means let China own those resources. And again, if they don't, if those resources are just standing stagnant, then where will the African development come in? Because it is clear that Western countries are the ones who are after the non-benefit of Africa. Moving to this issue of influence. The idea was that the Westerners will be less influential and China will be more influential. But we are saying the onus is on African leaders to see how they need to benefit from this Chinese investment that is being brought forth. And actually, China is bringing so much to the table in form of employment and other things which I will later elaborate on. And actually, the West poses more risk of quitting out simply because their requirements for investment in Africa are so much higher than those posed by China, therefore creating an increased opportunity for the Africans to benefit from such investment. The second issue that was touched on was that of human rights. Now, it's a well-known fact that China is coming from a messy background of human rights, and therefore they are still recovering, and yes, indeed, are all against the oppression of human rights. Non-interference should not be confused with the propagation of wrong methods. The fact that they do not interfere does not mean they are endorsing the bad labor practices. Case in point, in Zambia, the mining practices there, the laborers were complaining of what happened. What did China do? They openly criticized the owners and managers of that mine. So what does that tell you? Let's think about that. Now let's move on to this issue of conditional investment. Now, once again, this has been tackled by the fact that I've totally given a distinction between non-interference and propagation of a particular vice. And after China came under fire for totally not commenting on the crisis in Sudan, it was observed that China did indeed advocate for the propagation of those UN troops to go in and help them. The fact is that they had a mutual non-interference policy. Now I'm going to move on to my substantive matter. No, thank you. Let's look at incentive for African development. First of all, we need to understand that there are various development indicators. A couple of examples of development indicators. We have education, we have debt levels, and we have infrastructural development. Now let's consider education. China's contribution to the betterment of education systems has been great in Africa because China has this relationship due to the investment that is being brought forth that allows its people, the African people, to go to China, come back to Africa and use their skills and knowledge, and allows the Chinese to go from China and come into Africa and help in any way they can. And we believe this is a direct result of the investment agreements, in a minute, of the investment agreements that have been going on with China and Africa. Go.
Assuming but not conceding that this was true, why would this be any different with the Western companies coming in and stealing their work?
If indeed he was listening, he would have heard that the benefits that come from Chinese investment are far greater than those from Western investment, simply because the Westerners are looking out for their own interests, which we are not saying China is doing, but the difference is that China is looking out for the interests of Africa as well, as they are striving to have this mutual benefit. So indeed, moving back to this issue of education, because of the investment China is making also in the education systems of Africa, there is this increase of literacy rate and hence an increase in development because, as I've stated earlier, education is a huge development indicator. Now let's move on to this issue of infrastructural development. Now, it was correctly brought about by proposition that China does look into manufacturing industry as perhaps its main baby. But yes, indeed, because of this, China is able to offer jobs and use production methods which are easily copied by the local people. An example of this. In the 1980s and 1990s, there was a rush of Hong Kong investment into Nigeria. And during that period, there was also a propagation of local Nigerian traders or local Nigerian producers who were able to photocopy those methods and use those methods for their own investment. So clearly there was a very good transfer of skills and development. Yeah.
You need to make comparative analysis when you're looking at that. Please show us why that can't be done under the American system.
Thank you, sir. Comparative analysis was made by the first speaker. But anyway, I'll just delve into that quickly. Look, the point is that Westerners have proven through history and time that when things get tough, they run about. But Chinese investment has proven through history and time that when they stick around, they're there transferring development, and when things get tough, they don't run. Clearly because they filled that gap that came in when the Westerners left the African Sea. Now, moving back to this issue of infrastructural development, as I've mentioned, there is a real transfer of skills and indeed a huger benefit simply because Western production methods are tailored for the Western world. And clearly, there is no contest. Africa is no Western world. But with the Chinese, they are sensitive to the needs of Africa to make their production methods more feasible that they may get clearly involved in this. So a quick rundown of what has happened in this very brief, almost 7 minutes. First of all, I was able to counteract whatever was brought about by side proposition, showing you that they have not yet showed us why Western investment is significantly better and more beneficial than Chinese investment. Secondly, I talked of an incentive for African development, stating that because China's investment supports the various development indicators, it provides an incentive for Africans to develop on their own and propagate their own maturity. And because of this, we can clearly say that China promotes mutual benefit, and that is what we on side opposition are advocating for. Benefit for the investor and benefit for the recipient. While side opposition seems to be leaning towards a line that says benefit for only the investor, never mind about the recipient.